Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to show you how I simulated the ecosystem of Yellowstone National Park in Unity. This is going to be a really cool project, so without further ado, let's get started. Oftentimes, people use Unity to create 2D and 3D games, but this time, we're going to simulate an ecosystem. We're going to see how these animals interact, grow, and evolve. At the base of every ecosystem are the producers, which are the grasses or the shrubs, which means that the first step in our simulation needs to be the producers. So this is why I have these three prefabs in Unity. The first prefab is the blue bunch wheatgrass, which is a type of grass you can find in Yellowstone. It is characterized by having a lot of health, but it takes a lot of time to regrow and reproduce. The second grass in Yellowstone is needle and thread grass, which is known for having a low amount of health, but it's very fast at reproducing and it has a large reproduction radius. The last grass is moderate in both, which is western wheatgrass, has a moderate amount of health and a moderate reproduction rate and radius. Now that we have the prefabs for each producer in Unity, let's write the code behind them to model their behavior. What I have here is the producer script in C#, and what it says is that each producer has four main attributes. It's health, which goes from 0 to 1 depending on how much of it an animal has eaten, the regrow time minimum and maximum, which is the amount of time it takes for it to reproduce, and the reproduction radius, which is how far its offspring can grow. And so when the ecosystem starts, its reproduction starts based on its own attributes. What we also have to do is create an ecosystem data object. And this is sort of like a general simulation manager. It counts the amount of each type of species that there are. It also sets a carrying capacity for the amount of grass. This is because in the real world, you'll see that soil can only support a certain amount of grass. It can't support infinite grass. And so it sets the carrying capacity for grass at 30. Now, let's put this code to the test and see what this ecosystem is like with only grass. Wow, look at that. We started with one grass of each species, but slowly we saw how all the different attributes contributed to there being a lot of needle and thread grass at 24, but only one blue bunch wheatgrass since it takes a lot of time to reproduce. Now let's see how this is affected in step 2 when we add animals and them eating the grass. Now for step 2, just like I've done with the grasses, I have an elk prefab in Unity, and I've created a script to model its behavior in C#. It models how an elk eats, it dies if it can't find food, it looks around for food, and it reproduces in certain conditions. This is all stuff that a regular elk would do in Yellowstone National Park. Then I added a primary consumer tag in Unity and assigned all the values. With all of that out of the way, let's test how this elk works in the ecosystem. And wow, would you look at that? That's how our ecosystem looks when we have the primary producer and the primary consumers, which are the grasses and the elks. As you could see, there were lots of needle and thread grasses, and the elks also reproduced a lot, and at one point there were almost 20 of them. They all followed the grasses, they reproduced, they ate grasses, and in fact, if they couldn't reach their hunger threshold, then they died. Now let's see in our final step what happens when we add our secondary consumer, which is the wolf. This would finalize our ecosystem simulation of Yellowstone National Park. To introduce the wolf into the ecosystem, I added a wolf prefab, like you can see here. I added a rigid body and a capsule collider to simulate its physics, and then I added the secondary consumer tag to uniquely identify it in the game. Then I assigned all the values from the secondary consumer script which we are about to write. The secondary consumer script is very similar to the primary consumer script that we wrote for the elk. The only difference is that the wolf eats elk while the elk ate grass. Most of the behaviors like eating and reproduction were similar, and some of the attributes were different. But now let's see how the wolf ties together our entire Yellowstone National Park ecosystem simulation. Let's see what happens in this final demo. And one more quick thing to note is that just to test it, I added some evolution in the simulation. What I noticed was that the elk and the wolves became faster and they were able to detect food farther away since this was more advantageous. That's so cool because that's exactly what we see in real life evolution in ecosystems. And wow, would you look at that? My advanced simulation of Yellowstone National Park all tied together in the end. And we saw how the grasses, the elk, and the wolves all tied in with each other and interacted with each other in this simulation. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you're curious about the exact code, the GitHub repository will be in the description of this video. Bye!